This is the front drive shaft out of a 2005 Jeep Grand Cherokee with the Hemi. And it's got a problem. I had a lot of driveline vibration from it. And so I was looking at it real closely, and you can see here, I don't know if you can see this or not. Zoom in on it. There you go. It's a GKN joint. GKN drive shaft. Here's the part number for it. The problem is, let's see if I can make this work. The joint's bad. Cross joint down here, or the universal joint's okay. This one's alright. It's got a little click to it in the center, but that's normal. But nothing you can hear. But down on this end, we have a problem. Let me see if I can find a way to support my phone and I'll show it to you. Okay. So, here's that joint. Let's see if I can focus here. You hear that? It's not supposed to be that way. So this drive shaft is going to be bad. So here's the front drive shaft off of an 05 Jeep Grand Cherokee. It has 113,000 miles on it. Has the Hemi engine in it. And I was getting vibration, pretty severe vibration and booming in the vehicle between 60 and 70 miles an hour. Past 70 it would get a little bit less, but it was pretty severe at 60 and 70. It would shake the front passenger seat. So the problem here is that this joint, and you can tell I'm holding on to the prop shaft here with this hand. I don't know if that's going to be right or left in the video. Anyway, it's my right hand. If I grab the CV joint at the end, you can hear that, and the joint's just worn out. That's all there is to it. It's just worn out. So the plunge portion seems to work okay. If I grab the plunging shaft here, there's no play in that at all, between that and the main pipe, main tube. But the CV joint at the end just has a lot of looseness in it. And that's letting this shaft just vibrate on the vehicle. So you can get online and you can find a rebuild kit for this CV joint. You can also get it at Napa. The kit that I bought was from Napa, but I think it's a whole lot cheaper if you buy it on eBay. So I'm just going to walk through the process today of rebuilding this CV joint. First thing you've got here is an Oetiker clamp, and so you've got to get the Oetiker clamp off so that the boot will come off. By the way, I don't know if you can see this or not. If you can look down, let me zoom in. If you look down into the boot, this is a front-facing boot on the Jeep, meaning that there's always wind being pushed down into it this way. You can see that there's a bunch of junk around it, but basically that boot is cut, and that's grease that's come out, and so dirt is gathered in that boot. So it's going to be interesting to see how much grease is actually inside this joint once we get it apart. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the screws out. I think that these are 8mm. Oops, 8mm here, with the metal washer for 2 screws. There's a yellow mark right here this yellow mark needs to line up with the yellow mark that's on your transfer case. I don't know whether this is going to be the high side or the low side for balance, but you should try to line that mark back up when you put it back on the vehicle. So these are two caps that are crimped on. They're roll crimped. I think that I'm going to have to break that crimp, like pry that back with a flat blade screwdriver in order to get this joint apart. Alright, so I'm going to use a pretty stiff, beefy flat blade screwdriver and a hammer and just see if we can get under the edge here to pry that cap off. Maybe I'll use a slightly smaller one. Once I got the edge of the cap up here, I don't know if you can see that. Right here, pulled up the cap just a little bit. So the next thing you want to do is take a flat screwdriver and just go around the edge. There we go. Well, there's a little grease in there. Let's see, if I hold it there, you can see it. You've got some grease down in there. It looks like it's fairly dirty. The orange here is a seal. And so that's to keep the grease on the inside and keep dirt and water from getting into the grease, keep the grease from getting out. Here's what the bottom of that joint looks like. Grease is pretty dry, but it is still greased. But I don't know if you can see this. Holding the shaft, you can still hear that movement. The joint's just worn out. Alright, so the next thing we have to do is we have to take off this snap ring here. And you're probably going to need snap ring pliers to be able to do it. It's a big one. You might be able to get it off with a flat blade screwdriver and a hammer, but if you do, it'll go shooting across the room. So your best bet's to get some pliers to do that. Harbor Freight has several of them, as well as most of the automotive stores. So it occurred to me a couple minutes ago, I made a comment about this yellow mark and lining it up again on the vehicle. And I want to talk a little bit about that. First of all, the mistake I made is that this CV joint's not going to be on the vehicle. With any luck, we're going to put a different joint on here, so this yellow mark will be gone. But if you look closely, you can also see this yellow mark. And this yellow mark and this yellow mark are in line with each other. And like I said before, this is either going to be the high point or the low point for this drive shaft for balance. And that's going to balance, basically balancing is correcting for any manufacturing defects or imperfections that are going to cause the shaft to wobble when it's rotating. The other thing that it does too is that it corrects for any run out in the tube. And so there's a good chance that there's going to be run out in this tube. So even if we replace this CV joint down here, I still want to try to line up this yellow mark with the yellow mark on the vehicle, just in case there is some run out in this tube, and we will continue, we'll hopefully be able to put this back into the same place. And the correct way to do this would be to have the whole drive shaft balanced after I replace this joint. But because the joint was in such bad condition beforehand, I think that if I line up this yellow mark, even if I don't balance for the new CV joint down at this end, it's still going to be better than what I had before. Okay, so now let's go ahead and try to remove that snap ring. Let's see if I can turn this so that you can see it as I do it here. So there it is, real good view of the snap ring. I've got some pliers here. I don't know if I can do this one-handed. You're just going to hook your pliers in the two holes here. You're going to open up the pliers. Like I said, I can't do that one-handed. These are always a lot of fun. There we go. Okay, and the snap ring's off. So once the snap ring is off, then the joint is kind of free to move. The problem is now you've got the cap on the other side and you've got the boot band on the other side. So let's put it back on its side, and we'll have to take off one of those in order to allow it to be free. Alright, we'll do the boot band. I think the boot band's going to be easier here. So what I'm going to do is take a screwdriver and open up this clamp, this crimped clamp here. If I can release just a little bit of the tension in that clamp, then I can pop the end of the clamp up here. Maybe. There we go. You see that? So now this boot band is loose. Now with a little bit of finesse I'll be able to pull this off. So this end down here, once again, is just a spline. This may have to, oh no, it's loose. I was going to say it may have to be tapped off, but it doesn't look like it's going to. So you can just pull this off, stretch out that boot. If the boot hasn't seized to the shaft here, we'll be able to get it off there too. You have to pry up a little bit on this boot to release it. There we go. There you go. Now that's something right there. That boot was completely cut all the way around. That's what's left of the boot. It's supposed to be crimped into the outer cap here. Alright. First thing you probably want to do is clean up this shaft down here a little bit. This is rough down here, where there was a little bit of rust, even though the boot was clamped into this area. So you could take just a little bit of sandpaper, smooth that down just a little bit, and then try to get all the dirt and the grease out of this spline. So when you put the new trunnion on here, it'll fit correctly. Probably brake cleaner is what you want to use to clean up some of this, just to get the grease off there. Looks like my brake cleaner's out. I'm totally empty in that can. We'll try a different can. Alright, so now you can see I've got a little bit of a shine here where the boot sits. I'm going to bring this up and show you real close the details of this shaft. You can see here that there's a little ridge right in this area. Hopefully you can see that behind my finger. So the boot is going to be clamped all the way down here into this shiny area. And then back in here is just going to be extra space for the boot to move around. So there's nothing that clamps into this area. This is the only thing that we need to worry about. It is kind of surprising to see rust back in here though. There's evidence of plenty of water that's gotten into this joint over the years. So for the new stuff, what you're going to end up with is a kit that looks like this. This kit came from Napa. As I said before, you can get a kit online a little bit cheaper. I think I've seen them on eBay for quite a bit cheaper. Kit's going to come with grease, a bag that's got new snap ring, new boot band, new screws, and new washers. This is the new joint. New cap and boot. This is probably the part that failed on mine, and I'm guessing that this fails on a lot of them, but the boot breaks and that lets water in, and then that starts removing the grease, and over time that allows rust to form, and that rust of course is not as strong as steel, so if you get rust on the bearing surfaces where those ball bearings are rolling, the ball bearings are going to roll away that rust, and over time it's going to make the joint much looser, as mine was. We got our gasket here. And then the outer cap. So we'll get started. So this is the new boot band, and this is going to be tricky to install if you don't have the correct tool to do it. This is an Oetiker clamp, and Oetiker makes their own tools for this. So if you got the Oetiker pliers, you can certainly do this. I'm really reconsidering using my old Oetiker clamp here, since it's closer to the same diameter. You can see here that there's a big difference. This one has a lot more holes in it, so you could clamp it down, but I think you really need to have the tool to be able to do it, although maybe I wouldn't. So I know that in the comments for this video somebody's going to ask me why I'm not using just a plain old hose clamp. And the reason you don't want to use a hose clamp is that the hose clamp is not acting like a spring. So this clamp will continue to put constant pressure on there because it's acting like a spring, whereas a hose clamp may put pressure on it, may not. I'll tell you what, if you got the tool though, it makes this job a million times easier. And I'm not even sure I'll be able to get it tight enough with this tool, or with my hands, without the tool. May not be able to. Alright, so I've got it hooked. And now the idea would be to crimp this, to pull that hook back so it'll deform just a little bit. And then it will always put a constant pressure on that boot. Again, not the right tool for the job, but I'm going to try some side cutters here at different angles and just kind of work it together to try to get that same shape. Let me show you this. Maybe it would be easier to see. This was the old clamp. You can see up here at the top that there's this shape, kind of, I think they call this an omega shape. But this is formed, this used to be square. Like my new clamp is square. Just comes up this way, straight up, across the top, straight down. And they form this by kind of pulling the material in here, and that creates that spring action. So I'm trying to create the same shape on my new clamp here using some side cutters. It seems to be working okay. Just make sure if you're using side cutters like I am that you don't cut through your clamp. It's not what you want to do. Pretty good. It's got pretty good force on it. Alright, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to hit it with a hammer just to flatten it out just a little bit. Okay, there we are. And that clamp is on there, it's on there pretty good. Okay, next step is to get what they call the trunnion kit on there, bearing kit. One thing you may do is put some of your grease down in the front side, so we'll do that first. This is the bottle of grease that came with it. It's a heavy black, like a wheel bearing type grease. I'm going to put half on this side and about half on the other side. The pretty new bearing. This is not made by GKN, by the way. I don't know if you can see this. Can you see that? Got a reflection in there, don't I? Maybe there. There we go. I'm not actually sure who the manufacturer is on this. It says made in China. We'll go ahead and slide it on. It's pretty tight, but that's what you should expect out of these joints. They're going to be pretty tight to start with. The other thing you want to do is make sure that your joint is on there the way you want it to be. So you need to take a look at your cap and figure out which end your cap goes on. That's the end that the cap fits on. So you want that side to be out. So we're going to put it on like this. Hopefully your splines match. There we go. The other thing I'm going to do is grease that. Since that new metal doesn't have any grease on it at all, I'm going to put a little grease up here so it slides better on those splines. Now, when you do this, you can hit it with a hammer, but you don't want to hit it directly because you don't want to scratch it up. So if you do that, put in something else to prevent from scratching it. A piece of wood would be perfect right now. I don't have a piece of wood sitting here. Let's see what I can find. You got to tap it far enough down there that you can fit the snap ring on. So we're flush right now, but I've got to go a little bit farther to get that snap ring on there. Okay. A little piece of wood down in there. You do not want that in your joint. So we'll take that little piece of wood out. Alright. Yeah. Turn it sideways so you can see here. You see how it's sticking out? I don't know if you can see the groove or not, but the groove for the snap ring is out there underneath that grease. So that's about what you want. You just need to be able to make sure that that new snap ring fits. So you want to use the new one from the new kit. When you take the old one off, there's always a chance you're going to deform it. It's not going to be as strong anymore, so it's better if you can use the new one. And it's also much easier if you have a third hand to do this. Snap rings are no fun. There it is. It'll be pretty clear when it's in the groove where it's supposed to go, and that's definitely in the groove. You can always tap it to make sure, but I can see here that that's in the groove. Let me show you. It's in there. Okay. Now, before you start going crazy with the grease, the next thing you want to do is put your seal on. You don't want to get any grease on the wrong side of your seal. So we're going to work on the seal and the cap next. So the seal's here. Comes with your new kit. As we saw on the old cap, this is the old cap, the seal's going to go in the cap. So you want to take your new cap, and you're going to put it inside there. And it's a self-adhesive seal, so you can just stick it in there. But you need to make sure that all the holes are clear so you can get all your screws in. If you want to, you can line it up with some screws from your kit, just to make sure everything lines up correctly. It's a pretty stiff seal, so you're probably going to be okay with it, just placing it. The adhesive is good, but it's not like it's a one-time thing. So I think I'm pretty good there. I'm going to leave it there. Most of the holes are clear. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but the closer the better. Press it down, that way you don't have any grease that gets underneath there. And if your cap was oily or greasy before you put the adhesive on, clean it off with some brake cleaner. That way it'll, or maybe even rubbing alcohol, that could clean off the oil, get you a good sticky surface, or a good dry surface to stick your seal to. Alright, so I don't know if you can see this, but the other side of my cap here is not on completely. And that's not a huge problem, but I want to make sure that that gets on there so I don't start losing any grease. I'm going to come in here and just pinch it. At least I'm going to try to. There. This is not a huge issue either. This cap is going to be crimped from the factory, roll crimp like I think I mentioned before. And it's nice to have that done so that the cap doesn't come off when you're assembling it or disassembling it, but it's not required. So if you don't have the tool to do that, and I don't have the tool to do that, not a huge problem, because the bolts that you're going to put through from this side to attach this to your transfer case are going to clamp it all together so nothing's going to leak. Okay, next step here is to add the remaining grease to the cap, or to the end of the joint here. on this side, and then we're going to put the other cap on. So take all the rest of your grease and squirt it over here on this side. Try to get it down in the ball bearings if you can. The better you can pack the bearing, the better it's going to perform. I probably should have put more in on the other side now that I look at how much grease is left in this tube. The other thing too is that the cap has a hole in it. It's probably a 1 or 2 millimeter hole, and that's for air. So grease could potentially come out through that hole if you put too much on this side. And my recommendation would be to put more grease on the boot side than I did. But now that we're here, I'm going to do the best I can with what I've got left. When you put your cap in on this side, make sure your holes line up, just like the other side. And it would be smart to put the screws in, at least 2 of them, just to make sure that everything's going to line up okay. We'll put 2 there, we'll put 2 over here. Yep, there comes my grease out of the middle. So if you're like me, put a little more grease. If you're doing this, put a little more grease on the other side. I really didn't get enough over there. But at this point it would be pretty difficult to get the joint back apart. So I hope that over time it'll work its way over to the other side. There's no guideline with the kit on how much grease you're supposed to use. I assume you use most of the tube, but they could have given you a little bit of extra also. I have grease coming out the side here too. Okay. What I'm going to do just to make sure that everything is crimped together here, this is a light press fit. It's not going to require a big press to do it, but you do want to try to get it as close to flat as possible. So I'm just going to use a paper towel here on both sides. Try to press down on the cap, which pulled it up on the other side. But just try to get it close to where I want it to be assembled. Alright, now you've got a joint, not real crimped. It does seem to have a little bit of play in it, which is interesting. I was not expecting that. But it doesn't have the play that the other one did. In fact, it's a very, very tiny amount. So I think we're okay to put it on the car now. It should be stiff to move around, by the way. You can see I'm struggling here to move it just a little bit. That's actually okay. When it's a brand new joint like that that doesn't have grease worked into it and it hasn't been worked by the vehicle, it's okay for it to be a little bit stiff. Alright, now it's time to go back on the Jeep. Oh yeah, I wanted to show you this too. Two different styles of bolts here. Let me get them all so it looks the same. The hex head came with the kit. Well, I guess I should say the Allen head. These came with the new kit. These were on the vehicle originally. If you strip off one of these, this is an 8mm bolt, you're going to be kind of in trouble. I guess the same would be true for this, but you're more likely to strip the tool than you are the screw here. So you can decide whichever one you want to use. I don't think that it matters. They should have the same thread. Looks like they're about the same depth, although the factory one has a little bit of a rod at the end, I guess, that'll help you get it aligned with the hole. The factory one there it's not really a taper, but it's got a little piece of untapped steel at the end of it that'll help it align with the hole too. So it might be easier to reinstall the factory stuff. The one problem that you have with this boot design is that there's not really enough room for a socket, so I'll show you what I mean. So this is the old one, of course, but with the old one, when you go to put the screw and the washer in here, and this piece is the washer, you slide it in, you barely have enough room to get that in there. And then there's no room to get a socket in there to that screw. Does that make sense? So right here with this piece of formed metal here, you can't get a socket into that screw without damaging something. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but right here's a spot where my socket damaged it a little bit. Here's another one. So you're better off, if you can, using the hex head screws that came with the kit so you don't damage the new cap. These would be the new ones, and it wouldn't be a big deal to get an Allen socket in there this way. There is room to do that. If you don't have an Allen head for a driver, you're going to need something more than just a hex key. You could use Torx. If you can find the right size Torx. Let's see here. While I'm at the bench here, I'll take a look and see. Yeah, like that one's it. This is a T40. So this T40 Torx would give you enough to be able to torque it. It will give you enough clearance to get around that steel can. So I'm going to use this to torque it up. Okay, so I didn't shoot a video of reinstalling the front drive shaft here, also called the front prop shaft, propeller shaft. But you can see here that this is the new one. That's the new joint. Let's see here if I can find the Torx. Yeah. So you can see here. Well, I put the Torx in there. Well, if I can. look. You've got clearance now because we're using the internal hex. I think that's what they call that, like a socket head hex. And of course I used a Torx to tighten it up. Everything's tight on here now. So everything looks good on this side. Here's the front side. You can see down in there, hopefully. Can I brighten it up? Maybe not. Maybe not. I don't know what's best here. Anyway, you can see down there there's 4 bolts. They're tough to get to. You got to go over this exhaust right here, so you got to have a long extension. The trick that I used was the jack here. This is a floor jack in the shadow. I know it's hard to see this. Try it like that. Floor jack on the lower control arm. It's up on ramps right now. I know, so this looks a little bit dangerous, but it's up on ramps. I worked on it on the ramps, but in order to rotate that front drive shaft, put it in neutral, jack up the one corner here, then you can rotate this tire, which allows you to rotate that flange and get to all the bolts. I do have the rear tires blocked. You can see the brick down there. It's not that dangerous. You will need to lower this cross member. There we go, maybe. Yeah. There's a cross member here. You will have to take out these 4 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Lower those. You can lower it about an inch or so without fully disconnecting it. I put a jack under the center of it here so it wouldn't go anywhere if I did get it disconnected. That was enough clearance to be able to pull the drive shaft out. I didn't have to take out the other side, but it wouldn't have been that big of a deal to take out the other side too. Let's see what else. I did take off the front skid plate so I could get to the differential. I haven't put that back up yet. It's still sitting over here. That's 4 bolts. Pretty easy to get out of the way. I think that was about it. So hopefully this helps somebody. I guess I'll record a video driving it and see what happens. Okay, here we go. I know it's going to be difficult to tell what's a vibration in the video, but we'll see here. So prior to the CV joint change, I had a pretty bad, really low frequency roar or rumble between 60 and 70 miles an hour. I can't quite get up to that speed right now. So of course the joint is new, it's not broken in yet, so I'm kind of expecting to hear a little bit of noise from it, but I'm hoping not to hear that big vibration that I was hearing before. I could definitely feel play in that joint when I took it out of the vehicle. Maybe even a little bit on the vehicle when I had it just sitting up there. One of the important parts about this is that you've got to get the strain off the drivetrain. When you put it up on ramps and you've got it in park, you've got the whole system kind of bound up because the vehicle weight is pushing against the drivetrain and the transmission is in park. So it's all kind of tight and it's bound up. So what you've got to do is get it into neutral somehow. And then you can kind of move the drivetrain around, but you got to block the wheels so the vehicle can't move. And on this one, there's not a transfer case that has a neutral position in it. So this has a quadra drive 2 in it, and it's completely automatic except for 4 low. And so there's no neutral that I can put the vehicle into in the transfer case. Alright, so now we're finally able to enter the interstate here. Still getting a little bit of a vibration here, 65. I don't know if you can tell that in the video or not. There's 70. It's not bad though. It's a whole lot better than it was before. Much, much better than it was before. We'll slow it down here just a little bit. Hopefully you can pick up some of this in the video. I don't know if the phone will pick it up or not. just a tiny bit of low frequency rumble right there at about 65 miles an hour, but far, far better than it was before. Yeah, this is possible now that it's just a drive shaft that hasn't been balanced correctly. It could just be slightly out of the spec for balance, since I did not rebalance it after I rebuilt that CV joint. And I had no way to balance it at home. But this is much quieter, much more pleasant than it was before, so I consider that to be a success. Alright, I'm going to take this old joint apart and see if we can find where the looseness was coming from, see if there's any damage to the joint. Not even sure I'll be able to do this. Depending on how it's made, it could be pressed in there and there's not really any way for me to take it apart. We'll see what we can do. Same thing with the rear one as with the front. It's roll crimped, so we'll just have to pry it off. There it is. Caps off. That's good. Now, joint. So here's our joint. This is the old one, of course. And on the bench, it's really, really stiff. Of course, it was really loose on the vehicle. There we go. Interesting. See that? That's a broken piece of metal there. Now, I'm not sure if I did that. That would I had a hard time getting the can off. I would have a hard time believing that I actually broke that. That could have been the whole looseness problem right there. Could have just been that broken piece of metal. Now, I'm not sure whether I can pop anything else out or not. Probably mostly grease holding it in right now. but I'm not sure if I have even enough stuff to be able to degrease it here. I really need a parts washer and maybe some kerosene rather than brake cleaner. But we'll try with what we've got. I don't know if you can see this. Yeah, there's a crack right there in that ball retainer. So I'm thinking that this whole thing was cracked, and that's why that piece of metal came out the other side, and that's probably why this thing was loose. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm able to push this one out. I think that this one may be pressed in place, and I'm not able to do anything with it. I'm not able to press it out. I'm not able to get the balls to leave. I can't get them to go past the retainer. Not by hand anyway. So I've been trying to work some of the grease out. The grease in this is really dry. I've been trying to work some of that out of the way, out of the tracks for the balls, to see if they would start to come out, and then I could get the whole thing apart, but I just don't think I can. So I'm thinking that this ball retainer here is pressed in, and there's no way for me to get that out. But I think it's obvious that with that crack on the other side and the missing piece of metal on this side, that it had some problems.